The ring wasn't hers. The dress wasn't hers. Even the smile she wore that morning, practiced in the mirror until it held, belonged to some version of herself she hadn't yet decided to become. Adeline Marsh had been married for 11 days when she understood that her husband did not see her. Not truly. Not the way a man looks at something he has chosen. She had come to the Hargrove estate, Ashfield, they called it, though the name felt too gentle for the stone walls and long silences, as a replacement. Not in the way anyone would say outright, but in the way that every servant's careful smile and every guest's measured greeting made clear. She was the second daughter, the one who had been available. Her sister Cecily had been the first choice. Cecily, with her copper hair and her easy laugh and her particular talent for entering a room as though she had been expected. Cecily, who had spent 3 seasons being admired by Mr. Edmund Hargrove, a man of 31 with a quiet manner, a considerable property in Western Virginia, and a reputation for saying very little but meaning all of it, and who had, 6 weeks before the wedding, run off to Baltimore with a portrait painter named Henri, who wore his cravat untied and quoted Shelley at dinner parties. The scandal had not been loud. That was the worst of it, in some ways. Loud scandals are easier to survive. What happened to the Marsh family was the quiet kind. The withdrawal of invitations. The slightly longer pauses before people greeted them, the way the Hargroves' solicitor had arrived at their door not to dissolve the arrangement but to renegotiate it. There was still a daughter, after all. Their mother had presented this to Adeline as an opportunity. Their father had presented it as a duty. Neither of them had asked what Adeline thought, which was perhaps just as well, because what Adeline thought was that she was 23 years old, and being handed to a man who had wanted someone else, and that no amount of polite language would change that particular truth. She had said yes anyway, not because she was obedient. She had never been especially obedient, but because she had looked at Edmund Hargrove across their parents' parlor, in the stiff silence of that second negotiation, and seen something in his face she recognized. Not grief, exactly. Something quieter than grief. The expression of a person who has already decided not to expect anything, and is trying to make peace with that decision. She knew that expression. She had worn it herself most of her life. So she said yes, and they were married on a Thursday in October, and she came to Ashfield with 2 trunks and a borrowed pearl necklace. Her mother had pressed it into her hands at the door, which Adeline found both touching and mildly absurd, since the pearls had originally been a gift to Cecily from the Hargrove family, and she tried, in those first 11 days, to learn the shape of her new life. The house was beautiful in the way that old things are beautiful, not perfectly, but honestly. The woodwork along the staircase had been carved by Edmund's grandfather, she learned, and one panel near the landing had a small error in the pattern that no one had ever corrected. She noticed it on her 3rd morning. She did not mention it. Edmund was courteous. He was consistent. He arrived at breakfast before she did and rose when she entered. He asked about her preferences, for the menu, for the temperature of the rooms, for whether she preferred the east or west-facing parlor in the afternoons, and made note of her answers and acted on them. He was, by every measurable standard, considerate. He was also somewhere else entirely, most of the time, not physically. He was present at every meal, present in the evenings when they sat with their respective books by the fire, present on Sunday mornings when they attended services together. But there was a quality to his attention that reminded her of glass, smooth, clear, letting light through, and entirely impenetrable. She could see him. She was not convinced he could see her. She told herself it was fine. Arrangements like theirs were not built on vision. They were built on function, on mutual respect, on the quiet management of shared property and shared obligations. Her own parents' marriage had been arranged, and they had managed 30 years without obvious catastrophe. Expectation was the enemy of contentment. She understood this. She still lay awake some nights listening to the house settle, and wondering if the rest of her life would feel like this. Correct, and careful, and thoroughly unwitnessed. It was on the 14th day that Cecily wrote. The letter arrived in the Morning Post, addressed in her sister's looping hand, the C's wide and careless the way they'd always been. Adeline held it for a long moment before she opened it. She could feel Edmund watching her from across the breakfast table, not intrusively, just the natural awareness of 2 people in a quiet room, and she waited until she had returned to her room before she read it. Cecily was in Baltimore. She wrote, very well. Henri was wonderful. The apartment was small but had a lovely window. She was sorry, she wrote, the word underlined once, for how things had fallen out. She hoped Adeline was happy. She hoped Edmund was treating her with kindness. She thought he probably was, since Edmund was a fundamentally decent man, and she wanted Adeline to know that she had not run from him so much as run toward something else entirely, and she hoped that Adeline could understand the difference. Then, in the final paragraph, almost as an afterthought, she wrote, "There is something you should know if you don't already. Before I left, I made a mistake. I told certain things to certain people. About Edmund's business arrangements, about the terms of the Ashfield property, about some letters I had seen. I told them because I was careless and young and trying to make Henri seem more worldly than he was, and I did not think about what would happen afterward. You may hear things. I wanted you to hear them first from me." Adeline read that paragraph 3 times. Then she folded the letter, put it in the pocket of her dress, and went downstairs to find her husband. Edmund was in the study, reviewing something with his estate manager, a steady-handed man named Mr. Carver, who had managed Ashfield's accounts for 2 decades, and who regarded Adeline with the cautious respect one gives to an unknown variable. She knocked. Edmund looked up. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "When you have a moment." He had a moment within the half-hour. She was waiting by the window in the small sitting room off the hall, the one with the east light she'd claimed as hers, when he came in. He left the door open, which she had noticed he always did when they spoke privately. She had not yet decided whether this was courtesy or distance. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it the way he read most things, without visible reaction, with the focused stillness of a man accustomed to receiving information he didn't want. When he finished, he set it on the table between them. He did not give it back. "How much of this did you know?" he asked. "None of it." He looked at her. Really looked, for what felt like the first time, as if searching for the seam between honesty and performance. She held his gaze because she had nothing to hide, and because, she realized, she was tired of being seen through. "I believe you," he said finally. "That isn't what I came to discuss." She picked up the letter, folded it, set it back in her pocket. "I came because Cecily has warned me that someone may use this information. Whatever she told people about your business, about the property terms, the letters, it is already outside her keeping. That means it's outside mine. But it isn't outside yours." She paused. "Do you know what she saw?" A long silence. "Some of it," he said. "Then you know what exposure looks like." He sat down then, which she had not expected. Edmund Hargrove, in her experience of 14 days, did not sit in the presence of problems. He stood and managed them from a distance. The fact that he sat now felt significant in a way she could not entirely name. "There are men in Richmond," he said slowly, "who have been circling a particular contract that Ashfield holds. If they were to learn the terms, the full terms they would have leverage I would prefer they not have. It would not destroy us." He said us with no apparent self-consciousness, and she noted it. "But it would cost. And it would take time I would rather spend otherwise." "Do you know who Cecily told?" "I have a suspicion." "Then tell me." He looked at her again with that same quality of attention. "Searching. Recalibrating. Why? Because I have spent 2 weeks in this house learning the wallpaper and the menu and the proper way to address your mother's old friends," Adeline said, "and I have not yet learned how to be useful to you. This is something I might be useful for." The silence that followed was different from the others. Not empty, occupied. "A man named Garrett Phelps," Edmund said at last. "He was present at several dinners where Cecily and I were in company. He has the ear of 2 of the Richmond families. He is the sort of man who collects information the way other men collect debts, because he intends to spend it eventually." "I know who he is," Adeline said. Edmund's expression shifted, barely perceptibly. "How?" "He courted my cousin for a season. She declined him. He did not take the decline graciously." She smoothed the front of her dress. "He is also, as it happens, the husband of a woman I went to school with, Helen Phelps. She was Helen Fairfax then. We were not close, but we correspond occasionally. She finds him difficult and says so, which is more than most wives say. You correspond with his wife." "I do." Edmund was quiet for a moment. She could not read his expression precisely, but something in it had shifted. Not toward warmth exactly, but toward a different quality of attention. The glass had not disappeared, but there was something moving behind it now. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I'm suggesting that you may not need to approach Garrett Phelps directly, which would alert him that you know what Cecily told him, which would prompt him to act sooner rather than later." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm suggesting that there may be a quieter way, through his wife, through a letter, which is simply a letter between 2 women who went to school together and have not spoken in several months, in which I might mention, in passing, that Edmund and I have been reviewing the Ashfield contracts and have decided to adjust certain arrangements, not because of any external pressure, but because we thought it prudent, which would remove the value of whatever Cecily told him before he has the opportunity to use it." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the autumn light was shifting, cutting low and gold across the eastern field. She had noticed, in the past 2 weeks, that the light at Ashfield was something particular, the way it arrived slowly and stayed long, as if the house was worth the effort. "That is," he said carefully, "a reasonably elegant solution." "It isn't elegant. It's just a letter. Those are often the same thing." She looked at him. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not warmth, not affection, but something like recognition. The tone of a person who has encountered an unexpected equal. "I'll write it this afternoon," she said, and stood. "Adeline." She turned. He had not used her name before, not outside of the ceremony, not in conversation. He had called her nothing, which she had taken as the natural formality of their situation, and which she now realized might have been its own kind of avoidance. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing it to me directly." She thought about pointing out that she had no reason not to, that the alternative, sitting on the information or ignoring it, would have been contrary to her own interests as much as his. But she had learned, in 23 years, that some truths are understood more completely in silence than in explanation. "Of course," she said, and went to write the letter. Helen Phelps wrote back within the week. Her response was warm, slightly breathless in the way Helen had always communicated. The sense of a woman speaking quickly because she had too much to say, and insufficient time to say it. She was glad to hear from Adeline. She was glad that Adeline had settled into married life. She had heard, she wrote carefully, that things with the Hargroves had been rearranged. And she thought it sounded, and here she chose her word with visible effort, sensible. Edmund Hargrove was a good man. She had always thought so. And then, in the second page, folded separately as though to contain it, "Garrett mentioned something the other week, about Ashfield, about some arrangement. I didn't follow most of it, to be honest with you, I rarely do. But he seemed pleased about it, the way he gets pleased when he thinks he knows something others don't. I would not worry too much about whatever it is, Adeline. Men like him always find a reason to feel superior, and then they always find that the reason has shifted under them. Give my regards to your husband." Adeline read the letter at her desk in the east sitting room, in the afternoon light that came slow and gold and thorough. Then she went downstairs. Edmund was in the front hall, preparing to go out. Hat in hand, coat already on, the particular preoccupied look of a man mid-thought. He paused when he saw her. She held out the letter. He read it standing. Still in his coat, she watched his face. The stillness was there, as always, but something moved beneath it. Relief, she thought. And something more complicated. "Garrett mentioned it," Edmund said, "and apparently found reason to let it rest. People rarely spend ammunition they believe they've lost the advantage of." He looked up from the letter. He was looking at her the way he had that morning in the study, differently than before, with the kind of attention that was not glass at all, but something more like water, clear and present, and in actual contact with what it touched. "How long have you thought this way?" he asked. She considered the question. "My whole life, probably. There were 4 of us, growing up. Cecily and me and my 2 brothers, and my mother ran the house with very little money and very high expectations. And you learned early that the quietest solutions were usually the ones that held. Your sister did not learn the same lesson." "No," Adeline said. "But Cecily learned different ones. She learned to want things loudly, and to go after them even when it cost her. I always thought she was reckless." She paused. "I have been reconsidering that assessment." Edmund folded Helen's letter slowly, precisely, the way he did everything. "She gave up quite a lot to go to Baltimore." "She did." Adeline met his eyes. "She also knew what she wanted, which is more than most people can say." Another silence, different again from the ones before. There was something accumulating between them in these silences, not warmth yet, not anything she could name confidently, but material. Foundation. "The kind of thing you build on later." "I was going to ride out to the South Field," Edmund said. "There's a fence line that Carver has been worried about. Would you?" He stopped, started again, slightly more deliberately. "Would you like to come?" She looked at him. He was not looking at the floor, or over her shoulder, or anywhere else. He was looking at her. She thought about what she'd said to him that first morning in the study. "I have not yet learned how to be useful to you." She thought about how that had been true, and also incomplete, and also perhaps not quite the right thing to be aiming for. "Yes," she said. "I would." They rode out together in the afternoon light, the fields running long and amber to the west, the horse under her steady and patient. Edmund rode alongside her, without filling the silence unnecessarily, and she found, somewhat to her surprise, that the silence felt different outdoors. Less like the absence of something and more like simple space. At the fence line, he dismounted and walked to the section she could see was pulling apart. And she dismounted too and stood beside him, and they looked at it together without commentary. He crouched and examined the post. She stood with her hands clasped and looked at the field, and thought about how the south field caught more wind than the east, which probably contributed to the wear. The posts will need to be reset before winter, she said. He looked up at her. Carver said the same. I imagine he knows what he's talking about. He does. Edmund stood, dusting his hands. He was quiet for a moment, looking across the field. It was my grandfather's fence. He built it the same year he built the house. I keep meaning to have it modernized, and I keep, not because it's his, he confirmed quietly. She looked at the fence. It was a good fence, in its worn way, the kind of thing that has outlasted its usefulness by dint of being made with genuine intention. She thought she understood why he kept it. I noticed the carving on the stair panel, she said, the one with the error. He looked at her. The fourth panel from the landing. Yes, most people don't notice it. I notice things, she said. I don't always mention them. He turned to face her more fully, and the afternoon light caught the side of his face, and she saw, for what felt like the first time without interference, what he actually looked like when he was not managing himself. Younger somehow, less composed, more real. I know I have not been. He stopped. This arrangement was not what either of us would have chosen initially. No, she agreed. It wasn't. I want you to know that I am aware of that. That I am aware you came here under circumstances that were not straightforward. He seemed to be choosing each word with unusual care. And that the past 2 weeks, and this, he gestured vaguely, between them, taking in the fence and Helen's letter and the sitting room and all the rest of it, have not gone unnoticed. Edmund. She said his name the way he had said hers, not softly but directly. I don't need acknowledgement of the difficulty. I need. She stopped, reconsidered. What I need is to be in a marriage where both people are actually present. He was quiet. A crow crossed the sky above the south field, unhurried. I have not been present, he said. It was not a question. Not entirely. No. More quiet. The fence post stood between them, slightly crooked, still holding. I was not, he began and then revised. After the arrangement changed, I told myself that what mattered was function. That if I was considerate and consistent, and did not ask for more than was fair, that would be sufficient. He paused. I did not consider that there might be someone on the other side of that approach who was more than a function. Adeline looked at him steadily. Something in her chest had shifted, not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories, but in the quiet way of actual change. A weight redistributing, a door that had been stuck beginning to ease. I'm not requiring you to love me, she said. I'm not certain what I'm requiring, to be honest with you. But I am telling you that I'm here, and I'm capable, and I have opinions about fence posts and society letters and the fourth panel on the staircase, and I would rather be known for those things than overlooked for them. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened in his face. Subtle, complete. The way the expression of a person changes when they make a decision they have been approaching for some time without knowing it. All right, he said. All right. He looked down at the fence, then back at her. I would rather know you than not. It was not a declaration. It was not by any measure the sort of thing that finds its way into poetry, but Adeline had not come to Ashfield expecting poetry. She had come expecting function, and what she was beginning to find was something she didn't entirely have a word for yet. Something that might, over time and fence posts and morning breakfasts and letters to old schoolmates, become something like a life. Good, she said, and meant it completely. They rode back as the light went long and low behind them. The house rose up ahead, its stone a pale gold in the dusk, the windows beginning to hold their glow. She looked at it and thought, not what I would have chosen, at the beginning. And then, more carefully, I do not know yet what I would choose now, but I am beginning to want to find out. Edmund rode beside her. At the gate, he reached across and unlatched it for her, which he had not done on the way out, and she rode through without comment, and then he followed, and they came up together to the house in the last of the afternoon light. That evening, at dinner, he asked her what she had thought of the South Field. She told him. He listened, not with the careful half-attention of the past 2 weeks, but entirely, the way someone listens when they are genuinely interested in the answer. She talked for longer than she'd intended. He did not appear to mind. After dinner, sitting by the fire with their respective books, which had been, until now, a pleasant enough ceremony that meant nothing in particular, she looked up to find him watching her. Not the studied politeness of before. Something more direct. The fourth panel, he said, on the staircase. She looked at him. My grandfather made the error because his youngest daughter was ill that week, Edmund said. He was distracted. He never corrected it. By the time she recovered, he just stayed to remember the week and that she recovered. Adeline set her book down. I didn't know that, she said. I know. He returned to his book. I thought you might like to. She sat for a moment, holding the small weight of that, the gesture of it, the particular thing it meant for a man like Edmund to offer up something unnecessary, voluntary, not function, something else. She picked up her book. Thank you, she said. And the fire went on burning, and the house was quiet, and Adeline Marsh, Mrs. Hargrove, though she was only just beginning to feel the shape of that name, sat in the east-facing parlor of the home she had not chosen, and thought that choosing, perhaps, was not always where the good things began. Sometimes they began with a fence post, with a letter, with the fourth panel on a staircase that no one had ever corrected, and a man who finally decided to say why.